Hey everyone, it's Mia, and today I am going to be talking about all the books I read in April. No, in May. Firstly, I'm really sorry if the lighting is bad. I swear it's not the middle of the night, but it's a really cloudy day today, so it kind of looks like night outside. Anyway, let's talk about the books I read this month. I feel like this video is going to be pretty short. Then again, I do have a tendency to ramble, but I have talked about a lot of the books I read this month already. So I read 7 books this month, which is alright. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So let's get started. So the first 3 books I read this month were the books from the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. So this included The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. So I gave The Hunger Games 5 stars, I gave Catching Fire 5 stars, and I gave Mockingjay 2 stars. I made a whole video about me reading these books and reviewing them, so if you want to check that out, you can find that video, hopefully somewhere on the screen or on my channel somewhere. So I read the Hunger Games books because I wanted to prepare for A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes right after I finished the Hunger Games trilogy. This is a really quick brief summary of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because I feel like everyone already knows what it's about, but it basically follows the protagonist, Coriolanus Snow, who you will later know to be the president of Panem. Anyway, it follows him as a teenager. He attends the academy and it's the 10th Hunger Games and he is going to be a mentor for a District 12 girl. And I gave the book 2.5 stars and I also made a whole video reviewing it with spoilers, but if you want to hear my non-spoilery thoughts, my basic thoughts are I liked it until the last third. I think it's alright. There are some interesting elements and I think that it's really interesting to follow Coriolanus as a protagonist. However, there were a lot of things that I personally found disappointing or kind of annoying. So that's like my really vague review, but if you want to hear my thoughts and want to hear me discuss the spoilers, then I do have a video dedicated to that. The 5th book that I read this month was called Gemini Keeps Capricorn by Anita Sunday. So I've talked about Anita Sunday's books before on my channel, but basically this is the 3rd book in the Signs of Love series, which is basically a series of romance books that follow these 2 guys from different star signs and their relationship. I don't care for star signs at all. However, I wanted to read this book particularly because I had already read the 4 other books in this series that are currently out, and I wanted to just finish off that series. Hopefully there are more books in the future. I'm not sure if there will be, but hopefully. But anyway, I just wanted to finish off this series because I was planning to make a video in the future discussing how to write a romantic comedy, because I think that these books take a lot of really important things about writing rom-coms and implements them really well. Now, I have varying thoughts about all of the books in this series, ranging from 2 stars to 5 stars, and unfortunately I only gave this book 2 stars because why did I only give it 2 stars? My low rating is for a number of reasons, and when I say low, I mean it wasn't awful. I gave it 2 stars because I thought it was okay, and I think that a lot of the parts were enjoyable. However, I didn't care too much for the characters, and I realized that they're pretty similar to all of the other characters in this Signs of Love series, and I didn't care for any of the secondary characters. I also think that this book is a little bit weird because I don't think the tension is as strong in this book, where it's really strong in other books that I love in this series. So even though it is unfortunate that I didn't enjoy this book as much, it was still an alright read. Gemini Keeps Capricorn is basically a book about this university student. I think he's studying law. His name is Wesley, I believe, and it's basically him and his friendship with his RA in his student residence thing. What's his name again? I feel like it starts with C. See, this is kind of bad when you can't even remember the characters' names. No, it's not C. It's probably like... oh, it's Lloyd. Where did I get C from? The next book that I read was called Beach Read by Emily Henry, and this book I've been wanting to read for absolutely ages. Like ever since I heard of it, I was counting down to the release date. And basically it's about this woman called January Andrews. She's a romance writer, and way back in her college years there was this guy called Augustus Everett in her creative writing class whom she hated, Anyway, so like years later, she's at this house by a lake and she's working on her novel and it's not getting anywhere, and her next door neighbour is Augustus Everett, you know, her old enemy from college. And Augustus Everett writes like serious literary novels, so basically they have this bet to write each other's genres. So yeah, it's basically about writers, but it's also an enemies to lovers book. Anyway, I was so excited for this. However, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I think I would bump it up to 3.5 because for the most part it's enjoyable, but I think I just had really high expectations for this book. I did appreciate how this book was about writers because I find all books about writers really interesting. I think it's because I want to be a writer. They also talk about how women's fiction is seen as inferior to like literary fiction written by men and just literary fiction in general, which I think is very true. Another thing is that this book isn't completely light, so it does touch on more serious issues, and grief is like a really central part of this book, so it was good to have that darkness because like it's really well done because the grief kind of challenges the protagonist's view of like happily ever afters and romance and that whole thing. I think it's just very meta as this is a romance book and it's about a romance writer. Yeah, I just thought it was very cool. That being said, I didn't care too much for the romance. I mean, Augustus Everett is like, he's fine, but the enemies to lovers thing is, I think it's not really enemies to lovers, and I'm very particular about enemies to lovers where I think it has to be a little bit more extreme, whereas this is just like a kind of flimsy enemies to lovers, which is fine, but yeah. So the last book I read was The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, and this was a reread. So I read this like a year and a half ago, and I wanted to reread it because I want to read the third and final book in the series, and I just had to like refresh my memory on what was going on in this series. Now, when I first read it, I gave it 2 stars. I don't know how to rate it now. I think I would give it 3. I should explain what this book is about first. Okay, so this book is the second book in a series about this world called, what is it called? It's just a world. And in this world, there are Mistings and Mistborn. So basically, there are people with special abilities where if you consume metal, you have special powers, and Mistborn can consume all types of metal and they have all types of powers. Anyway, so this book deals with the aftermath of what happened in the first book, and as you can see, a lot of things happen in this book and all of the books. And I think that the way everything was really well thought out and well done and seemed really realistic for what would happen in this world where all this chaos occurred just demonstrated that Brandon Sanderson is really smart. Like, he knows what he's talking about. When he writes about rulers and politics and military tactics, I just felt like I was learning about that stuff myself. I also think the character arcs in this book were really well done as well. However, I will say that Brandon Sanderson, in my opinion, is more of a teller rather than a shower, whereas he will tell you the character arcs rather than demonstrate them. So I feel like everything in this series is a bit on the nose. I will say that this book took me forever to finish. I started it in April or possibly even March, and I only finished it on the very last day of May. I had to sprint through the last 200 pages that night to get this book finished. So yeah, those are all the books I read in May. I know that I only really talked about 3 books in this video, but hopefully you found it interesting nonetheless. I feel like throughout this video the lighting has just progressively gotten darker, as in I can see it looking really gloomy outside, so I apologize for that. If you want to see more videos from me about reading, writing, books, then consider subscribing. Bye!